Seconds of pure truth just ended a career built on lies. This is the story of how Jasmine Crockett proved that some people will never be intimidated by bullies. No matter how powerful they think this just happened, and it's already breaking the internet. 2 minutes ago, J.D. Vance made the biggest mistake of his political career. He told Jasmine Crockett to get out during a live congressional hearing. And what happened next will go down as the most savage political destruction in American history. 7 seconds. That's all it took for Jasmine to end J.D. Vance's career with a response so brutal, so perfect, so absolutely devastating that grown men in the hearing room started applauding before she even finished speaking. Mr. Vance, the only person who needs to get out is you. Out of denial, out of delusion, and out of a job that you're clearly not qualified for. The silence that followed was deafening. J.D. Vance's face went white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. And in that moment, everyone watching realized they had just witnessed the political equivalent of a public execution. But here's the part that will blow your mind. This wasn't just a random comeback. This was the culmination of months of J.D. Vance trying to intimidate, silence, and humiliate the most fearless woman in Congress. And today, she finally had enough. This is the story of how 7R. This is the story of the most epic political takedown ever recorded. But to understand why this moment was so devastating, you need to know what led up to it. Because J.D. Vance's "get out" wasn't just rude. It was the final straw in a pattern of behavior that had been building for months. The hearing was supposed to be about immigration policy, routine congressional oversight that nobody usually pays attention to. But J.D. Vance had other plans. He had been looking for an opportunity to go after Jasmine Crockett publicly, and today he thought he had found his moment. For the past 6 months, J.D. Vance had been seething with jealousy over Jasmine's rising profile. While he struggled to get media attention for anything other than his past comments about childless cat ladies, Jasmine was becoming the most respected voice on complex policy issues. Every time she spoke, her words went viral. Every time she asked questions, they revealed corruption and incompetence. Every time she stood up for what was right, the American people listened. And J.D. Vance couldn't stand it. He had tried everything to diminish her influence. He questioned her qualifications in committee meetings. He interrupted her during speeches. He made snide comments to reporters about her inexperience and grandstanding. But nothing worked. If anything, his attacks only made Jasmine more popular and more effective. So today, he decided to escalate. He was going to humiliate her in front of the cameras and remind everyone who he thought was really in charge. Big mistake. Huge mistake. The kind of mistake that ends careers and becomes case studies in how not to handle strong women in politics. The hearing started normally enough. Immigration officials presented their reports. Representatives asked predictable questions. J.D. Vance sat quietly, waiting for his moment to strike. That moment came when Jasmine began questioning the officials about family separation policies that were still affecting thousands of children. Her questions were detailed, well-researched, and devastating to the administration's narrative. She had documents, she had witness testimony, and she had evidence that policies supposedly ended years ago were still being quietly implemented. According to this internal memo dated last month, Jasmine said, holding up official documents, "Your department is still separating children from their families at the border. How do you explain this direct contradiction of stated policy?" The immigration official stammered, clearly unprepared for such specific evidence. I would need to review those documents before commenting." "You would need to review your own department's memos?" Jasmine pressed. "These are your policies, implemented under your supervision, affecting real children right now." That's when J.D. Vance decided to intervene. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman," he interrupted, his voice sharp with irritation. "The gentlewoman is grandstanding with alleged documents that haven't been verified by this committee." Jasmine turned to look at him, her expression calm but dangerous. "Senator Vance, these documents were obtained through official FOIA requests and have been verified by multiple independent sources." "So you claim?" J.D. Vance shot back. "But this committee doesn't have time for your amateur detective work and conspiracy theories." The room went quiet. Every camera focused on the exchange. because everyone could feel the tension building between two very different approaches to governance. Jasmine's voice remained steady. Senator, these aren't conspiracy theories. These are government documents revealing ongoing violations of children's rights. I would think you'd want to address that rather than attack the messenger. That's when J.D. Vance made his first big mistake. Maybe if you focused more on actual legislation instead of these publicity stunts, you'd understand how real governance works, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The comment was insulting on multiple levels. It dismissed Jasmine's legitimate oversight work as publicity stunts. It questioned her understanding of governance despite her proven effectiveness. And it carried the unmistakable tone of a man talking down to a woman he didn't think belonged in his space. But Jasmine didn't take the bait. Not yet, Senator Vance, she replied calmly. Protecting children from government abuse isn't a publicity stunt. It's our constitutional duty. Perhaps you should familiarize yourself with that concept. The response was perfect, professional but cutting. It reminded everyone that Jasmine was doing the job she was elected to do, while suggesting that J.D. Vance had forgotten his own responsibilities. But J.D. Vance wasn't done. He was getting more agitated with every exchange, more frustrated that he couldn't intimidate or silence her. The gentlewoman seems to think she's the only person in Congress who cares about children, he continued, his voice rising. Some of us have been working on these issues longer than she's been in politics. Then why are children still being separated from their families under policies you've had years to fix? Jasmine asked, her tone still calm but increasingly pointed. The question hit like a dagger, because it highlighted the exact problem with J.D. Vance's approach to governance. He talked about experience and seniority, but he couldn't point to actual results that had improved people's lives. That's when he made his second big mistake. I don't need lectures on child welfare from someone who's never had children of her own, he said, his voice now openly hostile. The comment was devastating in its cruelty. It was a personal attack that had nothing to do with policy or qualifications. It was designed to hurt, to shame, and to remind Jasmine that he saw her as somehow deficient as a woman. The reaction in the room was immediate. Several representatives gasped audibly. Committee staff looked shocked. Even some Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Jasmine's response was ice cold. Senator Vance, my personal life has nothing to do with my ability to recognize injustice when I see it. But since you've chosen to make this personal, let me remind you that you don't need to be a parent to have a conscience. The comeback was surgical. It called out his inappropriate personal attack while highlighting his apparent lack of moral clarity on children's issues. And that's when J.D. Vance completely lost control. His face was red now. His hands were shaking slightly. He was clearly furious that this woman wouldn't be intimidated, wouldn't back down, wouldn't show him the deference he thought he deserved. Mr. Chairman, he said, his voice now loud and aggressive, I move that the gentlewoman be held in contempt for disrupting these proceedings with her irrelevant grandstanding. The motion was ridiculous. Jasmine had been asking legitimate policy questions with documented evidence. If anyone was disrupting the proceedings, it was J.D. Vance with his personal attacks and procedural games. Senator Vance, the chairman responded carefully, the gentlewoman is within her rights to question witnesses. I don't see grounds for contempt. But J.D. Vance wasn't listening to reason anymore. He was spiraling, losing control in front of cameras broadcasting to millions of Americans. This is exactly what's wrong with Congress today, he shouted, pointing at Jasmine. People who don't understand how things work, disrupting serious business with their amateur performances. Amateur performances? Jasmine repeated, her voice still calm but with an edge that everyone could hear. Senator, I've presented documented evidence of ongoing child abuse by our government. If you consider that amateur, what does that make your response? And that's when J.D. Vance said the words that ended his career. Standing up from his chair, his face twisted with rage, he pointed directly at Jasmine and screamed, Get out! Just get out! You don't belong here. You're wasting everyone's time with your pathetic attempts to be relevant. The room exploded. Republicans were trying to get J.D. Vance to sit down. Democrats were demanding he be censured. The chairman was banging his gavel frantically. But through all the chaos, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. her hands folded, her expression calm, waiting for the noise to die down so she could respond. And when the room finally went quiet, she stood up slowly and delivered the 7 words that will be remembered for the rest of American political history. Looking directly at J.D. Vance, her voice clear and deadly calm, she said, "Mr. Vance, the only person who needs to get out is you. Out of denial, out of delusion, and out of a job that you're clearly not qualified for." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. J.D. Vance's mouth fell open. His face went from red to white in seconds. His hands started shaking visibly. Then something unprecedented happened. One person in the gallery started clapping. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. Within seconds, the entire hearing room was erupting in applause. Republicans, Democrats, staff members, reporters, gallery visitors, everyone was applauding Jasmine's response to J.D. Vance's outrageous behavior. The chairman didn't even try to stop it. He just sat there, watching J.D. Vance's complete humiliation unfold in real time. But Jasmine wasn't done. As the applause died down, she continued speaking, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had just won a battle she never wanted to fight. "Senator Vance, you told me I don't belong here. Let me tell you what doesn't belong here. Personal attacks don't belong here. Attempts to silence legitimate oversight don't belong here. And men who think they can intimidate women into submission definitely don't belong here." She gestured toward the documents on her desk. What does belong here is accountability. What belongs here is evidence-based governance. What belongs here is a commitment to protecting the most vulnerable members of our society, regardless of whether it's politically convenient. Her voice grew stronger with each word. "You accused me of grandstanding. But standing up for children who can't stand up for themselves isn't grandstanding. It's leadership. Something you might recognize if you'd ever actually demonstrated it." The room was completely silent now, every person hanging on every word. "You question my qualifications to discuss child welfare. But my qualifications aren't based on my personal circumstances. They're based on my commitment to justice, my preparation of the evidence, and my willingness to do the hard work of oversight that you've apparently abandoned." She picked up the documents she'd been questioning about. These memos prove that children are still being traumatized by policies that should have ended years ago. Instead of addressing that crisis, you chose to attack me personally. That tells everyone in this room exactly what your priorities are. J.D. Vance tried to interrupt, but his voice came out as a croak. I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said." Jasmine cut him off. "You told me to get out because you can't handle being held accountable by someone you don't think deserves to be here." She looked directly into the cameras. "But I'm not going anywhere. I was elected by the people of my district to fight for them, and that's exactly what I'm going to keep doing, no matter how uncomfortable it makes senators who prefer style over substance." Then she delivered the final blow. "Senator Vance, you've spent this entire hearing trying to silence questions about child welfare. You've made personal attacks instead of addressing policy failures. You've embarrassed yourself, this institution, and everyone who voted for you." She paused, letting that sink in. "So when you tell me to get out, I have to wonder, are you projecting? Because based on your performance today, maybe you're the one who should be looking for the exit." And with that, she sat down. The room erupted again. This time the applause was even louder, longer, and more sustained. People were standing up. They were cheering. They were witnessing something that hadn't happened in Congress in decades. A complete, total, absolute destruction of a bully by someone who refused to be bullied. J.D. Vance looked around the room desperately, trying to find support, trying to find a way to recover from what had just happened to him. But there was no recovery from this. He had revealed himself completely. His arrogance, his contempt for women, his inability to handle being challenged, his lack of substance behind the rhetoric. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were being shared millions of times across social media. #GetOutVance started trending worldwide. #JasmineEndsVance became the most viral political hashtag in history. The immediate reaction was swift and brutal. Political commentators who had previously given J.D. Vance the benefit of the doubt started calling for his resignation. Conservative publications that usually supported him published editorials questioning his fitness for office. But the most damaging responses came from his own constituents. Within hours, #OhioDeserveBetter was trending in his home state. Local newspapers published scathing editorials about his behavior. Town halls were being organized to demand his recall. Republican colleagues who had previously supported him started distancing themselves. The Senate Majority Leader released a statement saying that J.D. Vance's comments were inappropriate and not reflective of our party's values. Even Fox News, which usually defended Republican politicians reflexively, spent an entire segment analyzing how badly J.D. Vance had mishandled the situation. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from his own staff. Within 24 hours, 3 of his senior advisors had quietly resigned. His communications director stopped returning calls from reporters. His scheduler started canceling his upcoming appearances. They could see what everyone else could see. J.D. Vance had just committed political suicide on live television. Meanwhile, Jasmine's response elevated her to a new level of national prominence. Democratic leaders praised her composure and professionalism under attack. Women's organizations hailed her as a champion for professional women everywhere. Civil rights groups celebrated her refusal to be intimidated. But the most powerful endorsement came from an unexpected source. Senator John McCain's widow, Cindy McCain, posted a video message. "I've watched a lot of politicians in my time, but I've rarely seen someone handle themselves with such grace and strength under attack." Jasmine Crockett showed today what real leadership looks like. The praise kept pouring in from across the political spectrum, because what Jasmine had done transcended party politics. She had stood up to a bully in a way that inspired people regardless of their political affiliation. More importantly, her handling of J.D. Vance's attack had refocused attention on the original issue: the continued separation of children from their families at the border. Within a week of the hearing, Congress had passed emergency legislation addressing the policies Jasmine had questioned. The media investigation she had sparked led to the resignation of 2 high-ranking immigration officials. Most significantly, dozens of children were reunited with their families because Jasmine had refused to let J.D. Vance's personal attacks distract from their plight. 6 months later, J.D. Vance announced he would not seek re-election. His approval ratings had never recovered from the Get Out incident. His fundraising had dried up. His political future was effectively over. When asked about his decision to leave politics, he gave a brief statement that many interpreted as an indirect apology to Jasmine. "I've learned that effective governance requires listening to different perspectives and treating all colleagues with respect. I clearly failed to do that, and it's time for me to step aside for someone who can better serve the people of Ohio." Meanwhile, Jasmine continued to rise as one of the most effective and respected voices in Congress. Her fearless questioning and thorough preparation became the gold standard for congressional oversight. But when asked about the incident that made her famous, her response was typically focused on what really mattered. "That day wasn't about me or J.D. Vance," she said. "It was about children who needed advocates. Everything else was just noise." Today, the 7-second exchange between Jasmine Crockett and J.D. Vance is studied in political science classes as an example of how to handle bullies, how to stay focused on what matters, and how to turn personal attacks into opportunities for leadership. It's also remembered as the moment when American politics learned that some people can't be intimidated, can't be silenced, and can't be made to back down when they're fighting for what's right. 2 minutes ago, J.D. Vance made the mistake of telling Jasmine Crockett to get out. Her 7-second response didn't just end his career. It reminded everyone that the best way to deal with bullies is to stand up to them with facts, with dignity, and with the unshakable conviction that truth will always triumph over intimidation. If this story inspired you to stand up to bullies in your own life, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you believe that strength comes from standing up for others, not tearing them down, like this video and spread that message. Subscribe if you want more stories of courage defeating cowardice. And remember, in a world where powerful people think they can silence others with threats and personal attacks, sometimes all it takes is 7 seconds of truth to prove them wrong. That's what happened 2 minutes ago. That's what Jasmine Crockett proved. And that's why her voice will echo through history as the sound of someone who refused to be intimidated by anyone, no matter how loud they screamed. Because real strength isn't about making others smaller. It's about standing tall when bullies try to knock you down. And today, the whole world learned what that looks like.